Welcome back. Last episode, we talked with Dr. Sabrina Beroz and explored a few key themes from the 2023 NLN Leadership Institute retreat. The key themes were provided by expert leaders that inspire nurse educators to lean into their leadership roles, even when and especially when things get tough. Thank you for joining us. Now would be a good time to transition to our third theme, which was strategy. We got to hear from Dr. Joan Evans. She is an executive coach and consultant. Dr. Evans came to speak to us about strategic planning and also a little bit of neuroscience. Neuroscience in the context of leadership, which I thought was interesting because Dr. Rachel Anello and I, who also co-hosts, right, who's often a part of these conversations, her and I often talk about neuroscience in the context of teaching and learning. But it was really interesting to hear about neuroscience in the context of leadership. So that was pretty cool. You know, I think you often think about, as a leader, you can hold a lot of responsibility in moving a team or an organization toward a goal, and you can get very driven toward that. But I think there's a lot to be said for reflecting on, well, what is the goal? And why is that the goal? And how will we know we got to the goal? And how will we know we didn't get to the goal, right? So I think there's a lot of skill development that for a leader around strategic planning and determining, really being very thoughtful and reflective about goal setting and getting really strategic about it. And I think that she just shared a lot of insight around that. Yeah, so what were some of your thoughts, Sabrina?
So she actually differentiated a couple of things. She differentiated strategic planning from strategic thinking. And I thought that was really interesting because I think sometimes you say, okay, strategic planning, very detailed. I have to get my spreadsheet out. I have to put down, and it has to meet the vision and mission of the organization. And these are the goals. And how am I going to meet my goals? And then you have your tracking and who's going to help me meet these goals? And you often think about, am I developing this in isolation? And we're not developing it in isolation. That's where that whole strategic thinking piece comes in, where you have a team, right? You have a team who's going to work with you on how to do this planning, but you've got a whole team that's going to do that thinking piece and able to, I like to think about teams in two ways. One, and we did talk about this a little bit at the retreat, but how you need to have some psychological safety within that team so that you hear all the voices of all the individuals who are helping you with your strategic plan, so that strategic thinking piece is your team who's working to do that. And then the other side, of course, would be accountability, where the accountability piece is you need to get this done. But there's two, that you want to be able to hear, and that's kind of the ultimate. Amy Edmondson talks about this in her work. And we'll talk about different books, I think, towards the end. But she talks about teaming and how important it is today with learning organizations, which is what we all work in nursing education. And in order to do this strategic planning, you need a team who can hear all perspectives, yet know there is a goal to meet at the end of the goal. So I think I walked away with that, and I value teams. I started a consortium in the state of Maryland with a group, with a team. I couldn't do it by myself because I needed expertise besides myself in this team. And so they were selected for their strengths and their expertise, and we worked towards it, and we worked as a great team. We had that goal at the end. I like to say, Dr. Sue Fernaris always says that it's important to begin with the end in mind, which is what we did. We said the whole big goal was this, and that there was a team that we worked together and valued our strengths as a group. Dr. Evans also talked about strategic planning and thinking as an art and a science. So it's not just this detailed pen to paper plan that you're going to put together, that there is that other art side of hearing everybody's perspective to make it the very best that it can be. So that's what I took away as far as strategy from what she brought to us at the retreat.
Yeah, I keep thinking about, it keeps coming up over and over again, is that when you have a team, really getting strategic about looking at the different strengths that everyone brings, because that diversity in strengths and that diversity in thinking and the diversity in problem solving can, I think, if you can leverage all the pieces, in a very productive, meaningful way, I think it just drives everyone cohesively toward that goal.
Amy Edmondson talks also teams, that's a solid team, has a framework around it, but she also talks about a concept of teaming, which we do a lot more now in our learning environments, because with ad hoc committees, we come together quickly. We have a defined goal. You may or may not know those people who come together, but you have to quickly get up to speed on everybody in the team who has what to give to the team, what their strengths are, and then you meet your goal, and then you go off, and then you have another committee where maybe completely different people that you're working with. So our environments are different today when we think about strategic planning and these teaming and even strategic thinking, which is what we do in teams. I know she also talked about, and I'll let you, because you are really a neuroscience person, so I'll let you talk a little bit about that, but she talked about the amygdala and how, so I'm going to let you take off on that a little bit.
When we think about the neuroscience and leadership around how our emotions and how they show up in our everyday life, because we're superhuman, so we also have super emotions. But I think as humans, we like to kind of dismiss them or ignore them, but they show up all the time in our daily work, and how to kind of regulate our emotions, and when to be vulnerable about our emotions, and when to share our emotions. I think in a team and as a leader can be really important, because I think that shows, coming back to our earlier conversation, it shows connection. And when people, I think, in our teams as leaders can see some connection and feel some shared experience, which is often driven by emotions, I think that can be really helpful. So I think for a leader, it's about being able to flip from the neuroscience to being able to flip back and forth between our amygdala very intentionally to our cognitive prefrontal cortex. And I think that takes practice. And I think, and then to connect that also to psychological safety and Amy Edmondson's work again, to be psychologically safe, that safety generates pretty much from our amygdala. I'll give an example, Sabrina, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to put us out there a little bit, but you and I participated in a VR experience where you're walking the plank. Right? That's a perfect example. So Sabrina and I had this opportunity to go into a VR headset, and it's called Richie's Plank Experience. And there's a piece of wood on the ground in a very safe environment. And then you put the VR headset on and you go up an elevator, and the elevator opens, and there you are on the top of, the 80th floor of the Empire State Building or something. And you are tasked to walk the plank out into the open air of the outside of the building, right? And even though cognitively you know that you are safe and that you can walk this plank because you are actually on the ground and you are not outside of a building and you are not going to fall, our amygdala, it's called amygdala hijack, completely takes over, and our prefrontal cortex is no longer online. And I'm saying I'll just speak for myself. I got one step out onto the plank and I was like, no, I can't do it. But I could. Cognitively, I know I could do it. But my amygdala, the sweating and my heart rate completely took over, and it completely disabled me from going out onto this plank and completing the task at hand.
Right. So it was funny when I was in the VR headset, I kept flip-flopping back and forth saying, I'm on the floor, take a few more steps. I'm on the floor, take a few more steps. And I got almost to the end of the plank in VR, which opens up where you would just step off and then you would go down. And I don't know what that experience is because I didn't make it that far because my amygdala came across and said, no, you can't do it. And then I actually changed foot positions and then to the safest way I could to get back to the elevator. So yes, that is a prime example. And what's interesting is that, often Dr. Evans was saying that your amygdala is not always accurate. And that's a perfect example because that was not accurate because I really was not on the top of the 80th floor of that building, but it made me feel like I was. And so, and I think she was saying that your amygdala actually doesn't really shut off because it can continue on to heighten you. So as you are in more of a stressful environment, you may be controlled by your amygdala, and that your frontal cortex is what really helps to make sense of what's happening, but that tires. So I think it's an important that even that work-life balance, or maybe have, throwing back a little bit to that saying positively, I get to, kind of helps to just balance that off for you a little bit. So it's interesting to see how all these concepts actually are tying back to our experience with the retreat.
Absolutely. So I think it's a good time to move on to our fourth and final theme, which was advocacy. And the speaker was Mr. Michael Newsom, who is a Senior Associate Vice President for Finance and Operations for Virginia Commonwealth University. And he came to talk to the group about budget systems in higher education. And the disclaimer I want to make is that, when I see the word budget and finance, I'm like, yikes. Like, I don't know how to do that. And it has numbers and math, and I just shy away from it because those are not my strength. But I tied this topic to the word advocacy because I think as leaders, we often have to advocate for one of the most, I think, common things to advocate for is money, or compensation, resources, or funding for programs, time, right? And so I think, and those things are often tied together, or professional development, right? Which also has a cost to it. So much of what we do to move an organization or a team or a program forward, I think gets tied to the resources to make that happen. And as a leader, the only way we can obtain resources is to advocate. So just that's my kind of bias, I think in order to understand financial, or maybe this is how I make it palatable. This is how I can put any emphasis on understanding numbers, is that I can't advocate for a team or a program if I don't understand the numbers.
So, I was looking at advocacy and the concept as well, and thinking about how important it is that we have some sort of financial acumen as leaders, because I think it is important for us to understand both sides, that the person you are approaching with a budget item that you want them to give you some money for whatever resource it is that you want, you have to realize that there's another side, that they have to also advocate for others who are asking probably for things as well. So I think when you go into your administrator and you're asking for something, you have to have what I call, what is your return on investment? So, what is it that what metrics would you need going in to say, this is why we need to have this, maybe because we've increased the enrollment in our institution for nursing students, that because you've done that, you need more simulators, or you need more VR time, or whatever it is that you have to put together the numbers on why you need that and how that's going to improve your student outcomes, your program outcomes, and go in with that in mind. I think that's important. I worked with a person who was a businessman, and he used to use this phrase, and he would, well, Sabrina, is the juice worth the squeeze? Meaning, if I'm going to give you this money, is it really worth it? I need to know why. And I need to know also, is it sustainable? Is it just a one-time shot? And, whatever you've purchased is not going to be sustainable, because they want it sustainable. So that's another thing you want to think about when you're going in asking for something. And I think sometimes, particularly in nurses education, we don't get a lot of accounting and that information, that background, in order to be comfortable with numbers, because we use numbers in medication administration, but we don't often think, unless you're in a managerial role and manage a budget, we don't think about that a whole lot, particularly at patient care, or even at the educator role, unless there's something we really want to purchase. The other piece that I think is there's also something called return on expectations. And so that's really your educational, you've done an educational program, or you want to develop a program, and you have to explain why that's important and what kind of evaluation, because it's really not going to be marked by increasing enrollment per se. It's going to be more like, if you think about Kirkpatrick's levels of evaluation, and how is that going to change behavior in the end, and the results of what you've taught. So, you can go out to NCLEX scores. I guess sometimes that's a little bit difficult, but you might need to go out that far if you are asking for a pretty large expenditure. But yeah, I think advocating, knowing that advocating for your program includes expenditures, that we need to, as nurses, be comfortable, and as leaders, comfortable with that.
I think what's hard sometimes is that it seems, and for good reason, but it seems that there's like a person or a small group of people that have the budget in all of its detail and all of its glory. And there's a little bit of a curtain, right? There's like a little bit of a wall between maybe that budget and that knowledge and maybe you as a leader on the other side that needs to advocate for a program or, a division, or for some work. How do we, that's what I'd love to talk to Mr. Newsome some more about, how it is that you align, how do you create your pitch and structure your pitch and advocacy for funds if you don't always know what's behind the curtain? It feels like it's a little bit of you're kind of shooting in the dark a little bit, and I think that's challenging. And I think that takes some savvy and some mentorship and some practice, perhaps, to know, how do you anticipate what the leaders that are holding the budget, what's important to them, right? And
right.
How do they want to allocate these funds? Yeah.
Right. And who else is coming and asking, right?
Yeah.
Who else is coming in? And so I think that goes back to just trying to prove, that you really need this, and that what are your measures? What is that return on investment? How is it going to be sustainable within the organization? And what will it do to improve program outcomes? Because we're talking about nursing education. I think the other thing I heard you say, the cost of time, and that's really hard to measure. And I think we go and try and advocate for time in, for example, simulation. We want faculty to be able to have time to do simulation, but how in the structure of workload, that's time, right? And all of time does end up going to budget, because you have to look at, are you going to pay me for my time in simulation? A lot of these go back to budget, right? And budget items and workload. you're teaching at the same time as you're doing simulation. So I think it's important to consider, first return on, of course, expectations. You may need that, right? As well as the return on investment.
Yeah, I remember a specific example when I realized that, time and budget were sort of connected. I was a course coordinator teaching a very large course. Well, the course existed with a faculty and a teaching assistant that helped to support the work of the course. When I moved into the course to be the faculty and the course coordinator, the teaching assistant disappeared. And I remember saying, well, wait a minute, where'd they go? And it wasn't like they just went out to lunch, right? It was that there was an administrative decision to remove that resource for budgeting purposes from the course. And I remember feeling like, but wait a minute, that means for me to do the work that they were doing, it's going to take me more time. And that means my time and attention from something else has to shift to now do this work. And, it came down to budgeting. And in the end, I had to understand it. And I did, you just, okay, and move on, and just reallocate your time and attention in a different way, which can be challenging, though, sometimes when resources are removed, right, or you're trying to advocate for resources to be added. I think it's hard. And I think how to define, like you're saying, how to define the cost or the return on investment for that time, right? Because that time maybe for me could have been more spent on scholarship or on grant writing or on who knows? But you have to advocate for that. And that's hard. I think that's just hard to do.
Yeah, and you brought up grant funding, and with grant funding, you have an evaluation plan, right? You have a plan of evaluation that is created to show your return on investment for that funder, so that they know that if I fund this and I give this money, this is. So we have to think about when we go to advocate for something within an institution, it's almost like grant funding. This is what is needed within the program, and this is the plan of evaluation, so that I'm going to evaluate what that return is on the money that you've given me or the resources you've given me. So it's really the same concept. And I guess if we think about it from that perspective, because as faculty, we write grants all the time you have to have that, plan of evaluation. So think about that even for budgeting. Thanks for mentioning that, because I think that it aligns nicely.
Yeah. So I think this would be a good time to summarize. We talked about the 4 themes, which was creativity, connection, strategy, and advocacy. In summary, Sabrina and I just wanted to spend some time sharing our reflections from being in the presence of great speakers and great leaders that were sharing their time and expertise with us in the NLN Institute for Leadership program. And I think our hope is that you can take some pieces of these nuggets that we have internalized, take them with you. We hope to do a deeper dive into some of these topics in future weeks. I think that's it. I think maybe we can wrap up, Sabrina, by talking about some of our favorite, where we go turn for some leadership support and inspiration, some maybe favorite resources, books, or podcasts. Do you have any that you'd like to share?
So
your fire.
I have a couple. I've already alluded to some, but one that I thought was really interesting. It's called the Leadership Phrase Book. And this was given to me by one of my mentors that when I was on the board, I was always thinking, how do I phrase things well? So that when I speak up, that people will hear what I'm saying. Maybe they're not going to agree with what I say, but how do I say it in a way that sounds like I'm a leader and I have something to contribute? So it actually was a book called the Leader Phrase Book. And so it's written by Patrick Elaine, and it just talks about how you phrase things, how if you phrase things wrong, it gives you an example of how to phrase it wrong, and it gives you graduates And actually, it's a great book. So I recommend that if you find yourself in a position where you want to know how to state something that in a way, or it's intended the way in which your thoughts were, what your intentions were for it. My other book, which I love, is Thanks for the Feedback. The authors are Daniel Stone and Sheila Heen. They are really social behaviorists, and they talk about three things. They talk about the we, the see, and the me on how you see feedback. It's a great book to read, and it just gives you those three perspectives on it's really how you receive feedback. In nursing, we talk a lot about how we give feedback, but this is more about how to receive it and how we're receiving it, that amygdala, to tie that together. And the other book that I think is great is called Teaming, and it's by Amy Edmondson, and I talked about that a little bit. It's about how organizations learn, innovate, and compete in a knowledge economy. And so we're in a knowledge economy in nursing education, but today we're in knowledge economies because we're developing AI and different knowledge aspects. So that's another great book that I recommend by Amy Edmondson. How about you, Michelle?
Well, at first, I just want to say I love all of those resources. I do not know about the leader phrases, though. I'm going to have to go get on Amazon and pick that one up. So I do enjoy Brene Brown's books on leadership. I think Dare to Lead is one of them. I listen to her books because I enjoy kind of getting it directly from the author's perspective. So I listen to a lot of books. And then I'll connect that to some of the podcasts I most recently have been digging into. And I've been going several seasons back to go listen to the beginning is Adam Grant, Simon Sinek, and Brene Brown. They each have their own podcast. And what's fun about the three of those podcasters and authors is that they have very different perspectives, but they hearing them in conversation together is inspirational, especially when they're talking about a lot of human psychology, organizational behavior, and they all will visit each other's podcasts. So you can get all three of them on several different types of conversations. So I've been digging back and listening to their archives of podcast episodes. So that's and again, it's not always on leadership, but there's definitely huge leadership themes, but it's a lot on human connection, vulnerability, mentorship. So I think the themes that are talked about always get connected to leadership.
That's nice. That's nice.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Sabrina, for joining me in this conversation to reflect on the takeaways and ahas that came out of the Leadership Institute, the retreat that we had. And I'm just grateful for your contributions. And
yeah, thank you. This is my first podcast, so I put myself out there.
Yay! Congratulations.
Podcast. So thank you for inviting me. This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it.
Wonderful. Thanks so much.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of NLN Nursing Edge Unscripted Surface. We hope you join us next time. Until then, remember, whether your water is calm or choppy, stay connected, get vulnerable, and dare to go beneath the surface.